It's time to taste the new drops hitting the menu. And we have a really delightful lineup this month. Three really unique coffees in their own way, and each present a very diverse taste on the palate. So let's just jump right in. All right, first up, we have from Nyamasheke, Rwanda. This is Nungwe, and this is the 2024 Best of Rwanda fourth place lot. It comes to me because my trader for this coffee, which is Falcon Coffees, contracted and sourced this lot from Rwanda Trading Company before the Best of Rwanda competition. RTC set aside enough of this lot to enter into that competition, and then it went on to place fourth. And my trader went back and paid an extra premium on top after the win. So that's a really great win for everyone involved, especially us here, as I get to share with you one of the absolute best wash coffees out of Rwanda from last season. This coffee is also the Roaster's Choice bag slot #1 for February. And this is a fabulously sweet coffee. It's a washed red bourbon. It is very syrupy, velvety, and coating with all of the sweetness in here. All the notes listed really tie into a predominantly sweet cup. And because it's so thick and rich in coating, it really reminds of a jelly or a jam when it comes to the notes listed on the bag. And those notes listed are strawberry, raspberry, and vanilla. And this morning, this is a fresh roast. This is 2 days off roast. It's pretty juicy instead of jammy, but I expect with a little bit of rest, this is going to become a little bit of a heavier cup. Either way, it's really big and broad on the palate and just laden sweetness all throughout the sip. Stunning. It's a nice clean cup. Rwanda has a little bit of a earthiness to its terroir, a little bit of spiciness, sometimes baking spice and the like. It's sort of present in this cup. I'm relating it to the vanilla note that really hits in the body into the finish of the sip. But otherwise, this is a really clean cup, really, really nice sweetness to it, really jammy, just wonderful. A great start for our tasting today and for that bag slot #1 under the new Roaster's Choice subscription season. You're really going to enjoy this one. Beautiful, brilliant, really juicy this morning. The intensity is a lot higher than I expected it to be. Okay, beautiful, wonderful. What a start. All right, second up, we have from El Corazon, which is a village in Peru. This is El Cerro. Wow, what a contrast here. This is an extended washed geisha. El Cerro is the plot from which Efrain grows this geisha variety. And the extended wash processing, it's a very light touch, something like 40 hours of fermentation. And so it doesn't really super punctuate the cup with intensity. It's a very light touch and it allows the flavors to really work in balance. The complexity of flavor in this cup is really, really astonishing. Absolutely sensational. This is our bag slot #2 for the Roaster's Choice subscription this month. And the contrast between these two coffees is really wild. It's brilliant. This coffee is wildly complex, and part of the processing involved in it gives it a tropical acidity, which is really playful. There's a lot of complex notes to explore in that, and that really reflects on the notes that I've put on the bag, which are rambutan, dragon fruit, and cardamom. Sometimes I like to pick some of these very exotic tropical fruits as notes because I'm trying to represent more than one note in the descriptor that's involved. So for instance, with rambutan, that's sort of a green grape, kind of an apricot, kind of a lychee sort of taste to it. And I can definitely taste a combination of those. The second note, dragon fruit, is sort of like a soft pear, a little bit of a melon taste to it. And again, I think I can taste all of those things in here in front of this coffee. Finally finishing with cardamom, which is representative of a Peru sort of terroir that's imparted on the coffee, which again is a little bit of these like complex spices that exist. And it really adds a huge complexity into the finish, not to understate the florality that's also in this cup. There's a ton of florality in here. And this morning I'm tasting honeysuckle. I'm tasting kind of like a lily, a little more of a perfumey floral, complemented with that cardamom in the finish. Wild complexity to this cup. Very clean, tropical. The tropical acidity up at the front, leading into the sweetness in the middle and the florality, and just a little bit of like that cardamom spice punctuating in the finish. Brilliant cup. It's so beautiful. This is probably the best Peru that I've tasted this season. And Peru had a stellar year, a really, really excellent season. Beautiful, lively. Wonderful contrast between these two. If you're a Roaster's Choice subscriber and you are on the 2-bag plan, these are your 2 coffees, and you are going to be enamored with both of them. I'm certain of it. Okay, we have a third drop this month, something that is really wild, and this is Granito de Oro from Antioquia, Colombia, produced by Fabio Nelson. And this is a lively, big, bright, tropical, intense coffee. Wow. Also an extended washed fermentation on this one, and the variety is a Cuturo Choroso. So there is a lot going on in this cup. The processing on this is a little bit longer than what we saw in the El Cerro, and it's huge and intense and very electrifying on the palate. Wow. The variety of this coffee really presents a strong botanical mouthfeel on the palate. And I'm constantly reminded with coffees like this of just walking through botanic gardens indoors with lots of tropical flowering plants around, high humidity, little bit of kind of an earthiness or loaminess in there, but that doesn't really come through in this cup. It's more of like a melon and a melon rindiness kind of that comes through for me. Especially strong this morning on this recipe. I'm getting a lot of that botanic quality to it all throughout. But this is a very big and lively cup. Definitely reflects in the notes. I wanted to make sure that I was emphasizing the punchiness of this cup. So we've got pineapple, Hawaiian punch, and black currant listed as the notes. Lots of tart flavors, lots of big, intense flavors to it. The botanic quality in this cup is reminiscent to me of a washed Cidra. It's just so big and punchy and intense. If you can work your way through the intensity of the acidity in this cup, there is some florality there in the finish as well. It's sort of hiding. It's sort of like a tropical flower or walking through a botanic gardens, like I said. Just such a unique and interesting coffee. Sensational. It just puts a smile on your face. If you love intensity, if you love high acidity coffees, this one's got it. Wow. That cardamom, really pleasant in that El Cerro. Yeah, big jammy sweetness. Okay, let's go over some brewing recommendations, some rest recommendations, and the like. So starting back over here with the Rwanda Nungwe, I have profiled this to a light roast. We haven't seen one of those in a while, and I'm honestly a little bit rusty in producing it. I had to go back and reprofile this coffee so it's a little fresher than the rest on the table this morning for the tasting, but I really, really wanted to emphasize the sweetness in this coffee because it is very sweetness dominant. At 15 days rest or so, I think this coffee is really going to start hitting its stride. That's a very personal number to me. Obviously, I'm drinking these coffees very, very fresh as it's part of my evaluation process, but I do think that this coffee is more developed than what I would mark as an ultralight. And the very first profile of this coffee probably was an ultralight, and I didn't like where it was. It was too acidic and it wasn't presenting the sweetness and that sort of jammy sense that I was really going for. So as a light roast, I brewed it this morning with the Gabby Gentle recipe, 12-gram dose, 200 grams of water. That's a 1:17 ratio. It's excellent in the cup. It really brings out and emphasizes the sweetness that's present in this cup. This should be a very easy to brew and sessionable cup. I'd say especially as you go past that 15-day rest mark. For the El Cerro, this is an ultralight roast. So good. It's an ultralight roast. It's a geisha. It's heavy on the florals. A familiar style. If you've been drinking H&S for a while, especially H&S geishas, I recommend a 30-day rest on this one. And this was brewed this morning with the Gabby Standard recipe, a recipe that really provides clear flavor separation. And when there's a lot of information in the coffee, a lot of the stuff to explore, and there's a lot of complexity, I really like these high ratio extractions. Pushing that extraction yield really high does not degrade the cup or present over extracted attributes. It really brings out a lot of the floral character, especially in the finish of this coffee. Nice and clean, wonderfully complex. It's wonderful. Boy, I'm really loving it this morning. The sweetness is really, really, really nice on there. Excellent. Wildly complex. Okay, and then for the Granito de Oro, wanting to emphasize the intensity on this because this is really, really apparent. That's what this coffee wants. It's a high acidity, high intensity coffee. And so it also gets the ultralight roast profile. It's not as delicate and complex as the El Cerro over here, and it will probably respond to lower ratio, high TDS, lower EY extractions. This morning I brewed it also with the Gabby Standard recipe, and it's tasting very nice. The botanic quality of that into the finish is a little bit more emphasized than I was expecting it to be. I wanted more of those tropical punch notes, that Hawaiian punch note to be popping out. So this would probably be a great coffee to also knock down that ratio, try a little bit of a gentler approach, smash those notes together. You probably yield a lot more of that punchy intensity that I intended with the coffee. I've got a 30-day rest recommendation on that, and I reckon if you started early, you may have more of that botanic finish that you're tasting through. As this coffee rests and develops, I expect it's going to change quite a bit. I think it's going to be a very dynamic cup, so it will be something that you can break into a little bit early, get a sense of what's going on, and then really enjoy how it changes over time as you're drinking through it. Multiple different extractions, recipes, I think are going to work with this coffee and present a lot of very different and unique notes to it. Similarly, I'll go back to the El Cerro real quick. I think as you go past 30 days, start changing your recipes, start looking at different things. I think this coffee is really going to shine. It has so much complexity to it. And I reckon that on espresso extractions especially, this one is going to be really sensational. Okay, what an awesome month. 3 really distinct, interesting, unique coffees. It's a sign of what's to come this year, I gotta say. I'm working really hard this year. My resolution is to become better at sourcing coffee. I've got some excellent coffees lined up. Every day I get a little bit better at what I do here at H&S, and this really shows. These 3 coffees I think are perfect in their roast. They're exactly where I want them to be, and I can't wait for you all to start tasting them, enjoying them. All right, cheers. It's a few days after the tasting video, and I want to come back and add a little bit of an addendum to the tasting regarding this Granito de Oro, which in the tasting video I had brewed with the Gabby Standard recipe. I just finished shooting a video for the Gabby Gentle recipe, and I used this coffee for it because after that tasting video, I started brewing this coffee with this recipe, the Gabby Gentle, and I really enjoyed it quite a bit more. I mentioned previously with the Gabby Standard recipe, I was getting a lot of botanical vibes off this coffee, especially into the finish. The finish was really long and had that botanical sense to it, a little bit of sort of a melon rind attribute to it, which I wasn't loving, and I didn't feel like it was representing the notes that I had written on the bag like I intended them to. This is a really intense, punchy coffee, and I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing that when I'm tasting and when I'm brewing it myself. So with the Gabby Gentle recipe, it really opened up on this coffee. The intensity really increased on it. The juicy notes, the tropical fruit notes, very, very present. And the finish really came in to the sip and became a lot shorter and a lot cleaner. That botanical vibe to the coffee is greatly diminished on this recipe. That botanical note is so greatly diminished on this brew recipe that it's really surprising me. The two brew methods side by side, those two recipes side by side, provide huge difference when it comes to this coffee. So I'm switching my recommendation on this coffee to a brew method that provides a little bit of a lower total extraction yield at similar TDS values. That's really punched up the sip. Big, vibrant tropical fruits, a lot of punchiness, a lot of intensity to it. Really nice change and an interesting contrast on this coffee specifically between those two brew methods, and really highlights the different attributes you can get out of a coffee depending on how you're brewing it. Even though this is the same brewing device, same setup across the board, just a slightly coarser grind and a lower ratio on the recipe, and the cup is really transformed.